And we're back with Beer Money America. I got it right. Beer
Yep.
Money America podcast. And
Someone's been practicing.
I did. I was just a few minutes ago, I was going, Beer Money America, Beer Money America. I'll get it as soon as, someday. Anyways, welcome back. And as we lead into the Thanksgiving week here next week. So kind of looking forward to a little of a break. I don't know about you, but
Oh, yeah, for sure.
been scrambling a lot the last couple of weeks. So as you have, I think too.
Oh, yeah.
So it's always good to get these little breaks. Anyway, so what's going on in your world?
Well, it's funny. There's something that I caught a whiff of, politically wise, that sort of fell into. I think falls right into our laps, and I think I know that again we go back a lot to talking about local politics, but one of the third parties out there, one of the new parties that's trying to get started, is the No Labels Party.
Right.
And I heard somewhere that they're trying to possibly get a ticket between Joe Manchin and Mitt Romney. And the only thing I can think of is that's got to be just about the most awful combination of anything you could get for a new type of party. But what it got me thinking about was, and I know I'm just sort of jumping right into things here today.
No, absolutely. Go for it.
Is that, new parties have to have some kind of a message like that I think some people want to change or can actually, be involved with. So it's like you take a No Labels Party and you put in Manchin and Romney. You've immediately just sort of saddled yourself as the party of old ideas that nobody is interested in and nobody wants. And a lot of political parties, third party, want to try and sort of play this game where they're like, oh, we're all about reform, or we're all about, making people cooperate together. But if you don't know what you want to reform and you don't know what you want people to cooperate over, then you're just voting to change something for the sake of change. And to me, this rolls into things like what's gone on in Chicago, what's gone on in New York. I mean, you went from de Blasio to Adams, you went from Lightfoot to whoever the thing in Chicago. I mean, they changed. They're like, oh, we want to change something. We want a different outlook. We want to do this. But then you go back and you elect the same people that are doing the same thing. So even the change component of it is no good.
Right.
And I think about some of the things that the new parties out here that are trying to get that started. There's all these. It's always a push for, we're going to do something like ranked choice voting. Well, that's great. I actually support ranked choice voting. I'd like to see an injection of more people. But as a third party, that's kind of a self-serving tactic, right? Well, we want ranked choice voting because that gets us in the game,
right?
And so I think people see that, and it's like, okay, so we elect you, you get ranked choice voting, and then what do we get? Because if you get more of the same old, some people trying to do the same thing over and over again, you're nowhere. And then the other part of the whole Romney and Manchin thing is that there's this thing that always goes around. It's like, oh, we want to see more cooperation. We want to see more bipartisanship. But, you look at Manchin and Romney, and it's like, you want that bipartisanship? But that's no good at all. And so it's like, again, if there's no ideology that the party stands for, if there's nothing that, the people involved in it can say, look, we want to get involved in politics and change the mechanisms of how the politics works, which is an important first step. And it's something I do support. But then once we get there, we actually have ideas about things that could be changed and be made better. We're not just going to go, to have some kind of like bipartisanship kumbaya thing because, that's what goes on already. Again, and as I say, I'm kind of going on a long rant here, but it's like you look at what's going on with the Republicans in the House right now and all these continuing resolutions for the budget. It's like, okay, well, I guess they're getting along because they're passing continuing resolutions, and the continuing resolutions are bipartisanship. But
except for the 90 Republicans that didn't vote for it,
right? But yeah, so as I say, do the Republicans like this version of bipartisanship? Do Democrats like this version of bipartisanship? And again, if there was actually a voice of something in the middle that could say, hey, look, let's actually have something that's, better, as opposed to just continuing to doing the same things over and over again, or by like cutting off your nose to spite your face, like the whole getting rid of McCarthy thing, just to elect some person who's going to do exactly the same thing. it's nowhere. And so
Yeah.
when I hear about new parties or third parties that sort of pick up on something that's old and try and wrap it up in pretty paper and say that it's something new, just drives me crazy.
Oh, exactly. Well, and on the whole resolution fiasco that went on with the budget stuff, I mean, they, like you said, they nothing's changed.
Yeah.
Um, all they did was delayed it,
Hmm.
in two parts instead of one part.
Yeah.
That was the only real change there was there. So they didn't change anything or solve anything. And it was funny you brought that up because I keep going back to, and because you bring this up all the time about the messaging part of it, which I totally agree with.
Yeah.
There needs to be a new message. And it's like, but I keep going back to the simple stuff. Can maybe a third party, at least on your platform, say, hey, we do not condone fight violence in, when we have meetings, and
Yeah.
we're not going to ask people out to come fight with us, or we're not going to
Yeah.
jab people in the ribs and all this kind of crazy stuff that went on, primarily on the Republican side, but the Democrats have had their share of that kind of silly stuff too.
Yeah.
And it's just like, hey, can we at least get to this level? Because I thought these were our leaders, and you're asking people to come out and fight. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah.
This is how crazy it's gotten. And back to your point, I think the only way to sort of just break through that pettiness is to have those new ideas and people that can be solid with the third party concept. And
Yeah.
it can't, most likely, it's not going to be people that are been around for a while. The Mitt Romneys of the world and Manchin and all that. And I haven't read his book. Probably I won't read his book. But in Mitt Romney's book, apparently back in, when was that? 2016, I guess.
Yeah.
That Oprah apparently approached him about him
Mhm.
and Oprah running for that. So it's like, and he declined. He said, he just wasn't into it. But it was just funny. It was just like, ay, ay, ay. But probably they would have had some success because probably people would have voted for Oprah.
Yeah. Well, Oprah, again, Oprah could at least be, an interesting candidate. But again, if you don't,
Right.
if Oprah is running as the kumbaya candidate and doesn't actually say what she believes or what she's going to change or what she wants, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see the value in it. And
No.
it's interesting that you brought up some of the discord that we had lately, because I've been thinking about that a little bit too, but in kind of a little bit different light. And one of the other things that I think is sort of important for the country, not necessarily just for third parties, but we seem to have gotten to this point where we don't have a common vocabulary anymore.
Right.
Everybody wants to like left and right. So the Democrats are the left and the Republicans are the right, and the MAGA Republicans are the extreme right, and I don't know, the woke Democrats are the
Yeah. The AOCs of the world. Yeah.
or the extreme left. But I've never thought that really actually makes much of any kind of sense. I mean, why are the why do you have Democrats left and Republicans in right? And everyone, the classic example of what the far left is communism, and the classic example of what the far right is fascism. And the example for fascism is going to be Hitler, and the
Right.
communism is going to be either Mao or Stalin.
Right.
But if you look at Hitler, Mao, and Stalin, they were all socialists. They were all totalitarians. They took similar actions in what they did. They imprisoned people, took away
Yeah.
everyone's free speech. So why is that a dichotomy? It's
I
it's not.
know.
They're the same thing. They're on one side. They're on the
Yep.
totalitarian side. The other
Yeah.
side of the spectrum is anarchy, right? If one side is totalitarianism, then the other side is anarchy. And this is what
Right.
drives me crazy about the way people always talk about the politics of left and right. Because if you look at what the Republicans actually do, as far as far right, they big government spending money, intrusive policies, and this goes back to the abortion thing, because I can't bang on the Republicans enough for this. If you're telling women that they have to believe a certain thing and therefore have to do certain things, that is totalitarianism. That is far left.
Exactly.
It drives me absolutely crazy. And so when we get into the politics and we get talking about things, it's sort of like what the the Democrats are left. The Republicans are somewhat less left, but still left. We need a party that actually believes in individual rights, small governance, and is willing to govern from that perspective, because it just
Yeah.
is completely absent in our politics. And you
Yeah.
don't want to go too far right, because you don't want to be the anarchy party, because the libertarians are already the anarchy party.
Right. Exactly.
Got that stocked out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No.
it's one of these things where it's like all these discussions about, and I bring it up because they mentioned having some of the fights in Congress, and it's like people just throw accusations around, and
Exactly.
they're kind of meaningless. One of the things that I think that when I talk about not having a common language is, what is the definition of terrorist?
Right.
I mean,
It comes in all flavors.
the Israelis are the terrorists, Hamas is the terrorist, we're the terrorists. I mean, again,
Yeah.
it's like a word that doesn't have any meaning. What is the now the modern definition of racist?
Right.
I
Right.
mean, anyone
Yeah.
who doesn't like anything or says something that somebody else doesn't like, that's the definition of racist. Or what's the
Yeah.
definition of lie? What's a
Right.
lie? Anytime anybody gets something wrong, it's a lie? No.
Yeah.
As I say, we've lost the ability to have any kind of reasonable conversation about things, because we don't even, the words that people use for things don't even mean what people think they mean. So it's
No.
crazy. And as I
Yeah.
say, I think a third party could come along and just be like, look,
Enough with the BS.
yeah, if you call somebody a liar, then show that they lied.
Right.
You have to show that they knowingly misled, for personal gain or nefarious reasons, because that's a lie.
Right.
If they're just wrong on something, then they're just wrong. I mean, I'm wrong all the time.
Yeah. We all are.
Doesn't
And,
mean you're
well,
lying.
and again, it goes back to just that's kind of where we're at right now. It's like we're at such a base level of just pettiness and craziness that how does anybody expect anything to really truly move forward and progress? And a lot of that's been said in the recent week or recent years, I guess, is getting back to democracy, right?
Yeah.
And when you really boil that back down, go back looking through the Constitution and Bill of Rights, all this, it's all about, hey, we're trying to do the best for the greatest group of people, right? And at the end of the day, it's about let's kind of come together and figure out what's the best. There's never anything perfect, right? Never anything perfect, but what is the best solution possible at this moment in time? And we are so far away from that.
Yeah.
In any way, shape, or form.
I think that is such an important concept, because if people of good will can agree that there's no such thing as utopia, that you're never going to have this perfect situation.
Right. Doesn't exist.
Right. Then you're in a position where it's like, okay, we need policy that does the most for the most people.
Right.
And the way that we package people into little groups and categorize people as, this group or that group or whatever, makes that almost impossible, because modern politics always focuses on the need of some small group. But as soon as you do something for that group, you elevate them up in some way. By its very nature, you end up discriminating against someone else. So
Exactly.
if you're always trying to make things into the smallest possible groups to address, that means you're always going to be uplifting a very small group of people and essentially discriminating against everyone else. So it's the opposite of doing what's best for the most people. It's just like you're trying to do something for a very small group of people while neglecting or hurting everyone else. And It's the worst possible philosophy.
Well, and it also just brings it to the point where they're trying to get to this either or thing. It's like, well, there's always going to be a small minority group, whatever the issue is, right? That you're never going to probably address 100%.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that you don't have to respect and try and figure out a sensible way to make them whole or whatever the issue is. But we're all impacted in some way. I live in an HOA. I can't stand the HOA, right? But they have to look, and I've been on HOA boards, so I appreciate that it's a thankless job and all that.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, it's like they have to look at the greater good, and fact that they get peeved because I parked my car in the driveway for more than 15 minutes just aggravates the heck out of me, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's like, really, is this, I mean, everybody else doesn't have a problem with it. It's just me, apparently. So,
Yeah.
um, but I mean, that's a really minor issue, but it's the same thing. I mean, somebody's always going to be impacted. It's always, whenever I hear like comedians talk about as they make jokes and stuff,
Mhm.
that regardless of the joke, it could be the most vanilla joke in the world. You're still going to end up, embarrassing somebody, or,
Oh yeah.
not intentionally, or making somebody upset because they're reading something into it that you really didn't intend or whatever. Give it up, people. Just go with it. Let's just kind of figure out, hey, if there's an issue, let's figure out how we can improve it. Yeah, that's why I keep coming back. Hey, if the third party is all about just, hey, let's just take some really small steps, because that's
Right.
kind of where we're at right now.
Yep.
Really small steps, because people are so mistrusting of others.
Yeah.
When you think about it in the kind of macro level, on the micro level, like you and me, at the kind of person to person, most people kind of get along
Yeah.
and they can find a way to work through things, right? But you start kind of getting out and out and out. So it's like, hey, we need to kind of boil it all back down. Let's get back to, hey, can we not threaten people that we're going to go beat them up during a government meeting? Can we get
That's
there?
like the exact opposite of anything useful. I mean, absolutely terrible.
Right. So, yeah. So that, I don't know. That was definitely going to be one of the platform suggestions I put for third party. No
Yeah. It needs
verbal
to be
or
simple.
physical assaults.
Yeah.
Can we get there? Because
Well,
that's where we're at.
another thing that comes to mind, and again, I guess I'm sort of like on Big Issue Day, is I think an example of a policy trying to do the most good for the most people would be affirmative action, because I've always thought affirmative action philosophically was a really interesting thing. So obviously, in this country, uh, we artificially segregated everything. You had the famous water fountains for coloreds versus for whites.
Right.
So
Right.
we know that that's a fact. And so some libertarians that I know would say that economic forces would eventually right the ship. I don't believe that. I think because we artificially segregated this society, we needed to do something to reintegrate society, to bring, you know, society back to where it should have been before we artificially damaged it.
Right.
Now, the thing about that is that I think that not only helped the black community by allowing them to be, part of the community at large. I think it helped the country and everyone else, because countries that affirm and support things like segregation and racism fail. It's a
Absolutely.
horrible idea, and
Yeah.
it should never be tolerated. But where the interesting twist comes in for affirmative action for me, which I've always thought, is because if you're elevating a group of people, you are going to discriminate against other people. And one of the things that came out not too long ago was the lawsuit against Harvard and some of the Ivy League schools by the Asian
Right.
community, saying you've elevated so many people to automatic entry into Harvard that what you've done is you've eliminated the ability of Asian people to, achieve whatever they want to do by their own merits,
Right.
which in my opinion is a terrible thing.
Right.
And so, you know, at some point you have to look at affirmative action. I think you say, is it still helping the most people the most, or has it gone so far down the line that it's now an impediment? And people maybe look at things in a discriminatory way and say, hey, look, you're only successful because you got pushed to the front of the line.
Right.
You start having ideas like that. So there are all kinds of things that can be very helpful at some point, but then maybe need to be changed. And you have to judge the varying impacts of different policies, because I think you could have policies like that, but you can't be so wedded to them and never talk about them and make them so taboo to even discuss that you can never look to change them or modify them or make them better, or at times remove them. But you have to be honest about what's actually happening and
Right.
what's going on with it.
Right. Well, again, that's where it tends to fall apart because these policies get put in place and people believe that that's the gospel. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you're a living, breathing culture and society, A, there's going to be unintended consequences, regardless
Mm.
of what you do, to your point, that, you help one group of people, but you end up hurting somebody else. And number two, people do, hopefully society does change to some level, right?
Right.
Because, I mean, I think it's fair. It's obviously easy for me to say as an old white guy that I think things have improved. I'm not, but they're far from being solved.
Yeah.
But things have improved, and so from that point, how do we now kind of take a snapshot of what it is today? Because we may come up with some things that are much better than affirmative
Yeah.
action that would help people across the board. It's interesting when you brought that. I didn't. That reminds me of something I heard this week. I'm trying to remember where I heard it about the studies that have come out about younger males. Talk about taking a
Right.
wide swath. Younger males are having trouble these days relating to life and their role in society and all this kind of stuff because females have kind of zoomed up the scales for college education. And now I think it's 62% of college people going to college are now female, and men have just plummeted. And
Yeah.
and I forget, they have a term for it, of course, that now these younger males are, just can't figure out life in general. And I was watching this with my wife, and I'm just like shaking my head. And she was like, "Yeah, that's true. That's true." She works for the school district. And I'm going, what has transpired that, I mean, I think it's not so easy just to group all these young guys to say that they're just basket cases all of a sudden. I just
Yeah.
can't believe that that's the case. There may be other things that we need to do to prop them up, like not trying to force everybody to go to college. I mean,
Yeah. I think so too.
that's I ever since I've been to college, I've said college is just not for everybody. It's the worst thing to push on somebody if they're not ready for that or they don't want to do that or
Yeah.
whatever. But we push so much, and that probably did impact men or males more than women, females, because it used to be the reverse, right?
Oh yeah.
Females had trouble getting into college. And
Mhm.
now it's like doors are wide open and they're running through like crazy. And guys
Yeah.
are kind of going, I'm not so
Yeah.
sure.
What's in the world for me? Yeah,
Right.
it's funny. You sort of inadvertently hit on one of my favorite uh, sort of philosophical topics, and that is human biology versus human society. Because I think that for a society to function, especially a technological society that requires a vast amount of knowledge to, function in properly, um, you need certain laws, certain rules, and you need certain behavioral norms that allow people to sort of get along. But those societal norms are not necessarily what your body and your brain are instinctually telling you that you should be doing.
Yep.
And I think the best example of it is puberty. If you look at chimpanzees, when a chimpanzee becomes fertile, becomes sexually mature, they breed. I mean, it's just kind of
Right.
the way it goes. And that's our closest, animal analog to human beings or chimpanzees. So what happens with humans? Well, I mean, you hit puberty at 14 ish,
Right.
and sex is completely taboo. And it could be statutory rape. You can go to jail for it. I mean, all
Yep.
kinds. And again, I tend to get myself in trouble when I start talking biology because I'm
No,
going to get
I'm with you though.
terrible things as soon as the comments come out. But my only point is that biologically, your brain and your body are telling you that you're an adult, while society is telling you that you're a child and that you're going to be a child for another 10 years.
Right.
And it's so, but your body, your brain sort of reject that idea. It's like, I'm adult. I should be independent. I should be doing whatever. And I think part of the difference in education for men and women is that when the rush of testosterone hits men, they want to get out and go and be in a, I don't know, get in a fight in a bar somewhere, do whatever. I
Right.
mean, testosterone does all kinds of things to you.
Right.
And obviously, women go through lots of changes, and I'm not here to make any kind of judgment or anything, but I think men just have this sort of pent up, sort of like frustration, rage, desire, whatever, and women are more even keeled a little bit,
Absolutely. Oh
and
yeah.
so they can kind of like hit puberty and still do the school thing, and it's not so bad. I mean, obviously, there's extremes on either ends, and this is all
Sure.
massively having people roll together. But for men, the idea that you're going to just sit in a chair for 8 hours, I mean, that's tough.
It is.
Like
Most
a lot of guys just
guys can't do it.
can't do that.
Yep.
Go out, do something, get involved in something. And then the other thing is, I think men get themselves into trouble because they are doing the sit in a chair for 8 hours a day thing. And then they've got all this sort of messed up ideology in their head about who they are, what they should be doing. And then they go and they find trouble for themselves because that's what you feel like you want to do.
Yeah.
And so I think society has to take a step back and say, okay, men, kind of need this sometimes, and women kind of need other things sometimes. And the whole one size fits all method of education that we have, I don't think it's
Doesn't make
necessarily the
sense.
right way.
No, it doesn't make sense. And I mean, I get it to the extent that literally everybody's an individual, obviously. And
Mm.
so you can't have, 1,000 different kinds of schools in each school, right?
Yeah,
But so, there's got to be some coming together on certain things. But, to your point, I mean, it's obviously a well known thought that boys mature a lot later in life than, girls do.
yeah,
And all the biological things like you're talking about. I mean, all those things are, just there, and we're not addressing it. And for not only on an education standpoint, but just even from just a practical standpoint, it's
yeah,
like, you know, and now I'll probably get myself in trouble, but the whole thing about, dealing with sexual education, sex education, all that stuff, it's like, seriously, you think that by not talking about it,
yeah. Not a good idea.
that's that's going to stop them from doing things? It's like
Yeah,
I mean, once you get to be, I think even for boys, once you get to be 10, 11, you can kind of understand concepts well enough. And yeah, there'll be the goofballs that'll kind of chuckle and laugh and blah, blah, blah.
yeah,
But most of them will get the idea. And it's like, why are we hiding this? Because it's just nature, you
yeah.
know?
Well, that's what I say. It should be. You got to talk about the biology of things. You got to say, hey, you're feeling this way, but you're not feeling that way, by yourself. There's a whole.
No,
Everybody else went through this. They felt the same way. They dealt with the same things. It is tough, and you got to acknowledge it. And you got to say, look, there's the animal instinct within you that says do this and that, and it's like we can acknowledge that that's there, and that that's not necessarily a wrong or necessarily bad. But you also have to understand that you can't just go around molesting people,
right.
right? So I mean, it's better to talk about it than it is to just let it fester.
Absolutely.
But the
How do
other
they
thing,
know what the parameters are if they don't
yeah,
even understand what the base issue is, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I wanted to just mention one more time because it goes back to the affirmative actions thing. Like there used to be elite schools just for boys.
Right.
And, many of those schools, those were the places that business relationships developed. And, there were fraternal organizations that had
Yep.
vast amounts of wealth. And so, rightly so, the state came along and said, look, you can't do this. You can't just exclude women from these things, which are not just schools, but, you know, engines
Yeah.
of industry. And so they integrated all these things. And a lot of things that were sort of out there for boys to help boys become responsible men. And I would even throw in things like the Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
Suddenly that couldn't be for boys anymore, and boys now just got lumped in with everybody else. And I think that biologically speaking, men and women, boys and girls are different enough that we need to stop and maybe take a step back and say, look, we don't want women to be excluded from important financial institutions, But maybe we do need some schools, for boys, where boys can be boys for a few years, for the boys who need to be in a place like that to help them get going in the right direction.
Right.
And maybe that's not such a bad thing after all. Maybe we should have organizations like that and places for women to have women's
As
schools.
well.
Right.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, they would probably excel because the boys wouldn't be interrupting all the time.
right. And so I'm sure you could have excellent schools, and then obviously you'd have integrated schools too,
Of
for
course.
people who, were comfortable in that environment. But, when you start seeing the numbers that you're talking about, and I have seen numbers like that, you're going to leave, 49% of your society behind at some point. I
Right.
don't think that's a very good idea.
No, no, I know. And it just seems, again, going back to the third party stuff, that's one of those kinds of things that you could put some bold messaging around that
Yeah.
sort of thing to kind of rethink, let's clean the slate on this stuff because all these little areas just, they get so entrenched and people just can't get out of their little silo. And education's a big one. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm my mom was a teacher. I've got teachers throughout all of my family.
Both of my parents were teachers.
Yeah, sisters, aunts, cousins. I mean, I got a ton of teachers, and so I understand their challenges and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it's like you got to figure out a better way and recognize that these differences exist.
Yeah.
And rather than fighting it, let's embrace it and
Yep.
make it a positive. That's a positive. If you had a place where boys that were struggling could go, and it's not only just the gender thing, it's like the whole, creative versus, physical or
Then,
athletic groups
yeah.
of people, and I get it. You can't keep dividing and dividing and dividing, but there is and this happens to both boys and girls, that you're either right brained or you're left to some degree. You're either right
Yeah.
brain or left brain, or, you're into kind of physicality of things, or you're into more the creative kinds of things. None of those are wrong. But if you force everybody, my son, he couldn't care less about the athletics at all. He's a creative. And it was just trying to force him to go into PE was just like, it was just like torture. It was torture. And to the credit of the school district at that point, they did start providing options like, hey, if you were in, well, and my daughter ended up doing this too. She was into horseback riding. She didn't really
Oh,
like
nice.
just traditional PE kinds of stuff. So they had a way that, hey, if you go through lessons and you do all your horse stuff, that will qualify as PE. And same way with my son. It's like, well, if you go into the show choir thing, that will qualify as PE and other things like that. So they are starting to think about that. And it's like,
Yeah.
why not get them funneled the way they feel good and
Right.
natural?
I
And it
feel,
was
yeah, agree. Because but I would say, again, going back to the new parties, third parties idea, is that educational reform, should be a huge agenda item for any new party, because so much in California, I think, is a perfect example of this. And this goes back to local politics because schools are very local. They want to,
I getting more local.
yeah, they're always wanting to throw money at the problems in problem schools, but they never change anything.
No,
They just fund the same problems that they've been funding for the last 50 years. And so because they're unwilling to change, because it's one party in California, it's just the Democrats, they can't go against their own ideology, and they certainly can't go against the teachers unions.
right,
But you never actually get substantive change that allows things to move forward. And one of the things that they definitely don't want is they don't want school choice.
right,
But school choice would be amazing because then it would make sense for different schools, different types of schools, to open in areas that could attract people who were interested in education and different versions of education, find their own place with their own population of students. And it would be of a huge benefit, school choice is such a simple issue too, because it's just, the money follows the student. And it's like that should definitely 100%, I think, be part of any new party platform.
Yeah, the only challenge I've ever seen with the school choice is where you got low income versus higher income areas, and just having it, and I've we've all, I'm sure, witnessed it. When at least when my kids were going through school, they grew up in the Carlsbad School District, which is fairly affluent,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go to other areas where if you go to Southeast San Diego, where there's some really tough areas, um, it it's one of these things. Will the if the money truly follows the kid,
Mm-hmm.
will it really follow the kid in terms of having sort of level playing ground in terms of the quality of the facilities and all that kind of stuff? And the reason why I say that is because in the lower income areas, they just don't have the wherewithal that like a Carlsbad has, where they can raise so much more money just among the local population to do stuff that
Mm-hmm.
gives them a leg up that you don't find in some other part of the county. And so just following the money gets you probably three-quarters of the way there. So I don't disagree with that. But then it's like you're still going. It was like back when both my kids were in show choir, the whole dance and singing routine thing during high school, and they would go compete. And Carlsbad was, you know, it's fairly well off, uh, but they would go compete with Burbank, right
Uh-huh.
in the middle of Hollywood,
Yeah, yeah,
and it was just like, oh my god, there's no competition. I mean, they had these huge elaborate sets built and lighting, and I mean, literally, that would cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that even Carlsbad couldn't afford. So I
yeah,
mean, it's one of those things. It's like, how do you? And that was just for something that's sort of an elective. I'm not trying to equate show choir with any particular uh, issue, but when you kind of bring it down to just sort of the base level education, that is an issue of
yeah,
how do you kind of create that sort of level playing field, where with that money follows them to a charter school to Logan Heights or someplace down in Southeast San Diego. Are they really going to get an equal experience? I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. First of all, I think your argument is one for educational choice, because first of all, obviously there isn't a level playing field right now,
No, not at all.
so we know that. And the other thing is that if you take the amount of funding that we pay per student for public education, and you could build a charter school that wasn't burdened by the administrative requirements, the legislative requirements, all the union dues requirements. You could get rid of a lot of the fat, but you would still be getting the same amount of money per student. And then you could actually put that money towards the students as opposed towards the absolutely bloated
Yeah,
educational administration that we have in California, not to mention the absolutely bloated pensions and everything else. So you could start putting more and more money towards the students by having an opportunity of schools that want to put money towards the students to actually put money to students, and that would attract the students away. And the other argument that I've heard against school choice too is that, well, what's going to happen to the kids that get left behind in the public schools? And I would say that that's a question for the parents who would be leaving their kids behind in public school. Why are you leaving them there? If everyone else is going to local charter schools and getting a better education, and the money follows the students, just take your kid and put them in the charter school. Don't leave them behind.
yeah.
And again, it's hard for me to think that changes in that direction, changes that give people choice and opportunity, could ever be anything but an upside for a new party to promote. I'm really on board with that one.
Yeah, I think definitely in theory, I agree with you. The only thing I can say is only because, like I said, I'm surrounded by teachers. Um, uh, the only thing I can say, and I do think there's a valid point there, is if you look, at least today, and charter schools are a relatively new idea,
Yeah.
relatively new. I mean, they've been around for a while, but it's relatively compared to all the history of the nation. Um, that if you compare the outcomes of charter versus public schools, there's not a whole lot of difference right now.
Mm.
But that always brings up the question: well, is that because it's sort of a half baked charter school situation right now, or is it because they truly, it's all about the money, and particularly if they're private charter schools,
Mm.
they're worried about making sure that they're making enough profit to make it, worth their while, kind of thing. So I mean, I think there's some nuances there that got to be figured out. But I don't. I think always, anytime you can follow the money
Yeah.
and you reward for the behaviors you're looking to create, and if the reward is, great school or great, not even grades, just great students, period, however that manifests itself, then it kind of makes sense. Let the money follow the kid, right? It's just as soon as you get humans involved, it tends to get screwed up a little
Yeah. Well, there's always that. But
bit.
yeah, the last thing I would say about it is that I think part of trying to judge 100, it would be very hard to know exactly what would go on because the sample size is just too small. I mean, if you made the change where the money followed the student, first of all, it would grow slowly, which would be, I think, a very good thing because then you could
Yeah,
start to know what was happening.
get their legs in them.
But the volume of students that would be going to different places and doing different things would be so much vastly more than it is now that the situation we have now, I'm not sure is, would be even comparable at all. So, I mean, you'd have to see how it evolved. And again,
Right.
part of my philosophy for things is that if you have multiple parties and
Mm-hmm.
part of the philosophy of those parties is they're willing to look at what's actually going on and listen to what actually people are actually saying, that when you introduce something like money follows the student, if it really is going badly and things look really disastrous, you listen to that, you see that, and you say, okay, we're going to change course. We're going to be
Right.
adaptable. But right now, part of the problem we have in government is government cannot adapt
Oh,
because
absolutely.
the people who've been elected are so secure in their positions that they have no motivation to adapt.
Yeah.
In fact, they have exactly the opposite. Like, well, if we changed this and we let the money follow the students, what if that led to funding of other candidates that put me out of office? Well, I can't have that.
Right. I know. It always
So
comes back to that, right?
yeah, and so
Yeah,
that's why we don't get change, and that's why you need new parties that are willing to look at and do
exactly.
things.
Yeah. And it goes to the point where I do think, going back to where we started this conversation with third parties, and people do get focused on the presidential thing, which is whatever. But really, where the most impact can be made the soonest is at the local level. And the
Yeah,
education piece of it is a great example of that. That if there was some good, strong third party candidates that said, hey, listen, let's figure out, where the sweet spot is here. Because, I don't want to criticize public schools that they're a complete disaster or anything like that. I mean,
yeah,
there's some really good schools out there, right? It's public schools. They tend to be, not always, in higher income areas. Um, but so hey, take some of that, but at the same time, don't think that just because money follows the student, that's a bad thing for public schools.
right.
It just gets them more motivated to keep doing better.
Yeah,
And that's what we're all motivated by doing better.
yeah,
But you get entrenched in your little silo, and it's just a human trait. We're all guilty of it.
yeah,
We're all
yeah. But
guilty of it.
as I say, new parties are about options.
Yep.
Money following the student is about options. Options and the rights of people to make decisions about their own best interest.
Yeah.
The thing is, again, and it also goes back to the whole totalitarian versus anarchy thing. A whole lot of people making a whole lot of decisions based on what they feel is best in their particular circumstances because they know their circumstances better than anyone else
Yep.
is going to lead to better outcomes than one small group of people in some distant place trying to decide what's best for everybody.
Yeah.
So anything that gives people options, anything that gives people choice, I think that that's something that I
Yeah.
would say should be part of what a third party is really all about.
Yeah. And again, as long as it's sort of balanced with some general side rails, right?
Yeah,
So it's
you
like,
can't have anarchy.
yeah,
You cannot have
it, because you could envision there'd be places in certain parts of the country where they said, "Hey, we're all for that. We're all for more choice and all that." And you know what? We don't want black students in our school anymore.
Yeah. And
You
again,
know
and
what I
I'll
mean?
go back to what I was saying about affirmative action, because I've always felt very, very strong about this.
Right.
If you look at societies that embrace even small amounts of racism, that say that it's okay, we tolerate racism,
Right.
terrible
No.
places, they fall apart and it's awful. Because I know a lot of, libertarian business owners will say things like, well, any business owner should have the right to refuse any clientele that they want for any
Right.
reason that they want. And if the Ku Klux Klan wants to operate a bar in downtown San Diego, then that's their business and they'll go out of business because no one
Right.
will go. I don't agree with that position.
No
I
way.
think that
Right.
if San Diego or any other place just sits back and tolerates that kind of discrimination and bigotry, you are on the road to disaster. The government has to make a statement that bigotry and racism is not a tolerable part of our society.
Yeah. 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 No, absolutely. And, that's always the tricky part, but
Yeah.
it seems like such a no-brainer too at this point. You would think people wouldn't have an issue with, that little bit of, okay, let's kind of back off on this. I mean, it's great. Everybody has freedom up to a
Yeah.
point, right? So yeah, no, I hear
Well,
you.
again, I hate to say this, but I mean, I'm a firm believer in it. I think that right now, the way that our political situation is and the way the parties are set up, bigotry and racism can be a powerful recruiting tool for them, and
Oh,
that's a terrible
absolutely.
situation to be in. And again, it's the whole good versus bad people. If you can
Yep.
arrange it so that these people are the bigots, these people are the evil ones, and you can coerce people over to your side to do frankly awful things at times.
Hmm.
Well, because you're playing that back and forth with no arbiter in the middle to say, hey, wait. You got to look at what this person is actually doing. Don't just listen to the, the honeyed words coming out of their mouths. You got to look at what they've actually done. Look at what their philosophy actually, what do they actually stand for? And a third party can do that. But right now, it's like, be scared of these people. That's the boogeyman.
Oh
You got to
yeah.
on my side. And then once they're over on your side, you can get them to do terrible things at
Oh
times.
yeah.
So,
No, that's definitely, you know, kind of throwing that whole fear thing out there is definitely happening. It's not could, it is happening.
yeah, for
Big time.
sure.
So, anyways. All right. Well, let's I guess leave it there for now for this week. But no, good discussion. And again, I just see these all as such great kind of platform positions that a third party could really be clear and validate some of these kind of simple premises, and
Oh, yeah.
people will, I think, really be attracted to it because people, I don't know, people are just exhausted.
Yeah, and I think too that there are so many good positions out there,
Absolutely.
to move things in a better direction that the other two parties just won't even look at because they're so entrenched in whatever ideological nonsense they're bound up in. And
Yeah.
it's like that's why you need something new. It's
Yeah.
not enough to have somebody come along and say, "Hey, we're going to reform X or Y,"
Right.
because they don't do that. You know.
No, obviously.
Yeah,
No.
because you know what? I'll tell you right now. If they do put together the Manchin Romney ticket, they'll be talking all day long about how they're going to reform everything.
Oh, yeah. Right. Good luck with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you.
Yeah, right. Well, the good thing about that one is even if it were to happen, they would never get elected. I
That's
it,
definitely true.
and I now I don't know who will lose the most votes, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, but
Exactly.
those two combined will not win the election.
No.
And I mean, I can actually see where you know no labels if they actually found two really good candidates
Yeah, it could be good.
that they actually do have they could have a chance. But if it's anything like that,
Yeah, because
Romney
again, I'm
Mansion,
also,
just don't even just give it up. Just don't even waste your
I want new parties and I want reform and I want
time.
things to change. But if you're going to put that ticket together, that
That's
honestly, that is classic. Throw your vote away because who are you voting for? I
that
mean, come
is
on.
That is totally throwing your vote away.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
you gotta have something where, if you're voting for the party, you're doing that to build the party. I mean, it's not necessarily always going to be a reasonable expectation to say, oh, this person's going to get elected. You're voting for them to build the party.
right.
But if the No Labels Party is looking at people like Romney and Manchin, don't build that party.
No,
Spend your time doing something else.
exactly. Been there, done that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, man. Well, have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll catch back up after we all have some turkey and dressing and all that good stuff.
Sounds good. As I say, enjoy the holidays, and I will talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Bye.
Be well.